Hello dear viewers, this is the Ruslan Bailov channel, and in today's episode we will analyze the situation on the territory of Ukraine as of December 16, 2025. Over the past day, a whole series of significant events have been recorded, so I propose to immediately proceed to their analysis. So let us turn to the Ukrainian theater of military operations and analyze the situation on the line of combat contact. However, before moving on to reviewing the events in the Zaporizhzhia direction, in this section of combat operations, it is necessary to briefly dwell on the situation that has been developing over the past 24 hours in the area of the city of Novorossiysk. I remind you that the day before, Ukrainian special services distributed corresponding video footage on which the moment of an explosion on port territory was recorded. Within the city of Novorossiysk, while the Ukrainian side claims that during this attack, damage was inflicted on a Russian submarine. Nevertheless, a short time later, numerous evidence appeared refuting this version. First of all, attention was drawn to satellite imagery. If we look at the first published satellite image, we can clearly distinguish the contours of a Russian submarine, as well as the approximate location where the explosion was recorded. It is obvious that with high probability, the Ukrainian underwater drone did not reach its target in the form of a Russian submarine. Then another image was published. On it, one can also trace the differences in satellite images between the indicated dates. And here we also observe that, most likely, the destruction of the submarine did not occur, and the strike hit precisely the pier facilities. The pier. In other words, and somewhat later the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation published these footage, where the submarine itself is captured in a completely undamaged state. Thus, this is exactly the story that unfolded, but it certainly raises many questions. And the main question is as follows. It is not excluded that the Ukrainian side really made a miss, or perhaps the Ukrainian side initially planned to strike past the target, since the destruction of a submarine of this class on the territory of the city of Novorossiysk would naturally have led to a complete breakdown of the negotiation process. We observe that the Ukrainian side, probably with the support of Western states, is trying to demonstrate strength while avoiding excessive escalation. Well, we will continue to observe how this situation will develop in the future. And now I propose to turn directly to the front line. Let us begin the analysis with the Zaporizhzhia direction, where the armed forces of the Russian Federation are conducting offensive operations along Highway T-0814, R85, along the bed of the Hychel River. Today, significant corrections have been recorded on the territory of Huliai. As can be seen, at the present time the map has the following appearance. This is how the map was displayed as recently as December 15, 2025, and today the picture has changed as follows. In other words, we record that by the end of December 16th, Russian troops established control over approximately 50, possibly even 60% of the territory of the settlement of Huliai. The Ukrainian army, for its part, retains only the central zone, that is, the entire sector that stretches along road T-0814, as well as along Shevchenko Street. Today, the corrections in this direction received partial confirmation and were published by various neutral cartographic resources, including pro-Ukrainian sources. As can be seen, such a correction was added. In addition, today's corrections on the map are confirmed by video materials. Today, Ukrainian sources published numerous objective control footage on which Russian servicemen under attack by Ukrainian FPV drone operators are clearly captured. Here, for example, is this episode. This strike delivered by Ukrainian FPV drone operators was recorded at precisely this point. The attack was directed at this structure. Also in this video material, one can see several more episodes, one of which took place along Velikaya Street and another along Druzhby Street. Thus, we record that there is already that a significant amount of video evidence is present, confirming the advance of Russian formations in the Huliai section of combat operations. Extremely important footage and significant information is coming today from the territory to the north, in the area of the settlements of Ostapovskoye, Danilovka, Nechayevka, Peshanoye, and Gerasimovka. I remind you that the day before, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation reported that the Vostok group of forces in the course of combat operations managed to completely advance in the area of the settlement of Peshanoye. and based on yesterday's reports, based on yesterday's video recordings, a correction was made on the map in favor of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. Today, this information is receiving confirmation from individual cartographers and is being supplemented. Today, according to data from various cartographic services, Russian formations managed to capture a series of strongpoints between Ostapovskoye and Danilovka. Russian troops also managed to advance in the direction of the settlement of Andreevka and consolidate on the First Street. Information is also coming in about the beginning of assault operations on the settlement of Gerasimovka. And the village of Gerasimovka is already the second settlement on the Ukrainian side of the Hychel River. We analyze the situation in this section. At the present time, one can say a battle for a bridgehead along the Hychel River is unfolding. This is the last relatively reliable, stable and solid defensive line before the Russian troops before the moment when Russian formations begin movement further in the western direction toward the city of Zaporizhzhia itself. The battle for the Hychel River is, apparently, the decisive battle of the end of 2025. And the outcome of this battle will undoubtedly determine the subsequent actions of the Russian army over the next 6 to 9 months. Next, we move in the direction of the settlement of Novopavlovka. Today, Ukrainian sources report that Russian troops undertook another attempt to storm this settlement. Precipitation in the form of snow fell on the territory of Donbass. At the present time, a slight warming is noted. This has led to the fact that dense fog has settled over the entire territory of Donbass, which creates significant difficulties, through which it is extremely difficult to distinguish anything, to conduct any reconnaissance. And, naturally, as soon as such dense fog formed over Donbass, the Russian side decided to use these meteorological conditions, and in individual sections, assault operations were initiated. On these frames, we observed the movement of a column of armored vehicles in the direction of the settlement of Novopavlovka. I remind you that a month ago, Russian troops already undertook an attempt to storm. Then it was possible to penetrate, consolidate, land infantry units. Then the Ukrainian side initiated counterattacks. And now we are recording a second attempt, more precisely an attempt to transfer new units for subsequent consolidation. That is, in the near future from the territory of Novopavlovka, we expect many news items. Apparently, at the present time, an intensive meeting engagement is occurring here. Next, we move to the Pokrovsk direction. Today, from this section of the front, there is practically no news whatsoever. There is only an insignificant correction in the southeastern zone of the settlement of Myrnograd. This is how the map correction was made, and the correction was performed based on video materials published by the Russian side. On these frames we observe strikes by high-explosive aerial bombs on positions of the armed forces of Ukraine on the territory of both the Myrnograd and Konstantinovka citadels. The strike was delivered on this building. Accordingly, an insignificant correction was made. Next, we move in the direction of Konstantinovka. From this section, many important news items are also coming, and the most significant apparently battle in this direction at the present time is unfolding in the area northwest of the settlement of Chasiv Yar, between the settlements of Markovo, Fedorovka, Belokuzminovka, Verolyubovka, and the railway line between the settlements of Chasiv Yar and Kramatorsk. It is precisely in this direction that at the present time Russian troops are trying to strengthen their positions, to reach the defensive lines of the armed forces of Ukraine along the Fedorovka, Belokuzminovka line. And also Russian troops are trying to strengthen their positions along the railway line. This formed bridgehead north of Konstantinovka opens for the Russian army a path in the direction of the settlement of Druzhkovka, as well as in the direction of the highway route N20. From the Seversk section of combat operations today, there is practically no news whatsoever. Today, many news items are coming from the Borovskoye section of the front. And not only today, over the past several days, a very active front is observed here. I remind you that literally the day before we analyzed the fact that Russian formations began a gradual bypass of the settlement of Korov Yar. That is, at the present moment, Russian formations are actively conducting an assault on this settlement in order to reduce the distance to the Oskil River from, one can say, the northwestern outskirts of this settlement. If this can be accomplished, then the distance will be reduced to approximately 8 kilometers, which will provide the Russian army with establishment of complete fire control over this territory and will somewhat reduce the logistical capabilities for the armed forces of Ukraine. Active offensive operations are being conducted here at the present time. Also, the day before, we analyzed combat operations in the area of the settlement of Boguslavka. Here, the Ukrainian side is undertaking attempts at counterattacks. Russian formations are trying to strengthen their positions. And today, a report comes from the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, according to which formations of the armed forces of the Russian Federation managed to strengthen their positions in the area of the settlement of Novoplatonovka. Based on these reports, so far without any objective control footage, a correction was made on the map. This is how the map in this section changed over the past several days. Now we can conclude that the garrison of the armed forces of Ukraine, which at the present moment is located on the territory of the settlement of Boguslavka, apparently found itself in operational encirclement. Russian formations in the near future will concentrate all their efforts on, one can say, advancement on the territory of this pocket. After straightening the front line, Russian troops will be able to advance further in the southern direction toward the settlement of Borova. At the present moment, the distance between the forward positions of the armed forces of Ukraine in the area of Borova and the settlement of Novoplatonovka already constitutes just over 2 kilometers. That is, in fact, in the next several days, an assault on Borova itself may begin. If Russian formations manage to consolidate on the outskirts of Borova in the near future, and also advance in the area of the settlement of Borova Yar, Rubtsi, Lozovoye, then this could lead to complete encirclement of the garrison of the armed forces of Ukraine, which is located on this large bridgehead between the settlements of Novi, Vigorovka, Pesky Radkovskie, Podliman, Borova. This entire territory may turn out to be isolated from supply. From the Kupyansk section, news continues to come about further attempts at counter-offensive by the armed forces of Ukraine, and today the map underwent significant changes. This is how the map was displayed as recently as the day before, December 15, 2025. Yesterday already individual pro-Russian experts reported the advance of Ukrainian formations in the western zone of the city along the Oskil River. Today, by the way, a correction was even made precisely along the Oskil River, along the street called Hrihoria Skovorody. But today pro-Russian sources publish this video material on which we observe how a serviceman of the armed forces of the Russian Federation passes through this point and makes a report that this section of combat operations is under complete and stable control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. Based on this video material published by the Russian side, we made a reverse correction of the map in this section. Despite ongoing combat operations, we record that the pace of the possible offensive of the armed forces of Ukraine has decreased. And we remember that at the present time the counter-offensive in the Kupyansk section is being carried out, one can say, at the expense of formations, apparently, which previously were located on the territory of Sumy Oblast, and where some time ago Russian formations also became active. In the Vovchansk direction, Russian troops are gradually advancing in the area of the settlement of Vilcha and Semenovka. Russian formations continue assault operations in these directions. But over the past day, as can be seen, the map did not undergo any changes. Apparently, in the near future, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation will confirm information about the strengthening of positions in this direction. And that is all, dear friends. Thank you for watching, subscribe to the channel, put your likes, and all the best to you.